This is the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast, the only faith-based autism podcast on the web. Here are your hosts, Greg and Jessica Hurlbut.
Well, welcome to episode 7 of the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. I am your host, Greg Hurlbut.
And this is Jessica Hurlbut. And each week we want to offer you a dose of help, a dose of humor, and a dose of hope.
So this week's podcast title is Sleep. So
Yay.
Number 7, which is the number of completion, which is good because sleep is something we all need in order to be complete. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is the importance behind sleep. Why are we even talking about this as a podcast about, parents with children with special needs, or even any parents in reality? But honestly, sleep is such a big deal when it comes to kids, but it's a big deal when it comes to us as adults. It's really a big deal no matter who you are. As a human, we have to sleep. One of the things that people sometimes struggle with, and they look at sleep almost as kind of like a necessity that almost you wish you could do without. And anybody that embraces sleep and loves sleep, people just kind of look down and oh, you're lazy, you like to sleep in, or those kinds of things. And we look at it almost as this I guess I gotta sleep. Because we're a driven society, we're driven by our accomplishments, we're driven by all the things we need to do. And so we sometimes put sleep on the back burner as if it's an option. But really, if we don't get enough sleep in life, we're in big trouble. Some of the statistics out there literally say if you go 24 hours without sleeping, or if you sleep 4 to 5 hours a night for a week consecutively, it's actually like having a blood alcohol content of 0.1%. Now, if you don't know about what that would mean, at 0.08%, you are driving drunk according to the law. So 0.08%, you're driving drunk. If you don't sleep for one day, you're acting as if you're drunk almost. And if you only sleep 4 to 5 hours a night for a week consecutively, you're so sleep deprived, you're acting inhibited in life. And so listen, sleep is outrageously important. We've always known this. We know it to be true. But for some reason, it always becomes the first option in our life to give up. It's like, I got to get more done. I won't sleep. I got to get up earlier. I won't sleep. Or I got to do this. I won't sleep. Or I got to watch that Netflix one more show. I won't sleep. And so really, we want to talk about the importance of what sleep means in your life and what it can mean to you if you don't sleep. For me, I realized many years ago, I need sleep. I am not one of those people. I don't know if you've ever heard this term. There's a group of people out there, apparently they exist. Actually, I think Jessica might be one of them. That are called the sleepless elite. They say 1% of people can function on less than 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night. I cannot. I realized quickly in life I have to have sleep. If I don't get that sleep, especially consecutively, 1 or 2 nights in a row where I haven't gotten a good night's rest, I am a terrible human being. I'm miserable.
I can vouch for it.
I'm miserable.
I helped him come to this realization. It's like hangry when they say you're hungry and then you get angry. Well, there's got to be a sleep one, and he has it. So.
Yeah, I have both of those.
I have both
hangry
of those.
Too. But it's true. I realize, man, I don't function well. I don't get up. I don't act as a good parent. I don't act as a good husband. I don't even act as a good leader or a pastor of my church. Right. If I'm sleep deprived, I'm not a good human being for the rest of the world around me. So it's not even about my own care for my own body or my own personhood. It's also about how does it affect the world around me when I'm not operating in a healthy way, and sleep being one of the main ones.
Yeah, and I think as parents, sleep can feel very elusive, because we feel like we're victims to our kids. So maybe I've got sleep down pat, but then I have children who don't sleep, or who wake up in the middle of the night, or who, want to get up at 5 a.m. when I want to sleep later than, every morning I tell my daughter, if the sun's not up, you shouldn't get up, but she doesn't get it, right? So it's easy to feel as parents that maybe I understand the importance of sleep, but it's so unattainable because of my children. And I'm here to tell you that it's, as much as you might feel a victim to the fact that I have these children that won't sleep, that it is possible, and we have every special need and every circumstance, and 5 children with different, struggles. It is possible to get a good night's rest. It is possible for your children to learn to sleep well. It is possible, and honestly, we are not very good at very many things, but as a family, I feel like we're really good, and our kids are very good sleepers. So it is possible. Don't feel like it's elusive or that you're a victim. So
I would tell you right now that if we had not figured out sleep
we would have lost
as
our
a
minds.
family, we would not even be a family today.
true.
It's not that I can make that almost a joke and lighthearted, but it's
No.
not actually a joke. There were moments where I thought I was going to lose my mind over the fact that we had not been able to sleep because of things with Mara and Jacob, especially our two special needs kids, our kids
Yeah.
with autism, but also because of our other kids. There was other reasons they weren't sleeping great, and we kind of had to really buckle down. And honestly, to this day, I know that this is one of the greatest functions of our life. Our kids go to bed, they sleep, and we get up. And it's not perfect by any means,
But it's
but
good.
we get our rest.
Yeah. So we wanted to give you 3 tips for a dose of help. Real kind of practical too. That we feel like we
Yeah.
have not mastered, nobody's mastered, but really kind of embraced, and would strongly suggest you do the same. So the first one that I had to learn and struggle through was, it's not about what I want, but it's about what my kids need. So the perfect example of this is Mara. So even before my daughter Mara was diagnosed with autism, she of course had meltdowns and things like that, but she was my first girl. So I wanted this beautiful, I remember posting all these pictures on social media, this beautiful nursery. Right? So we had this oak crib that was just gorgeous. We had these, painted the room and decals all over the wall. I mean, it was like a Pinterest-worthy nursery. Picture frames hung up, which is just ridiculous. Why would you put the stuff in your kid's, room? Because it's going to get ripped off the wall. But that's what I wanted. And I quickly learned within the course of several months, this is not what my daughter Mara needs. Now, this is a severe, kind of an extreme case, but there's truth in this no matter what your situation is with your children. So, Mara started jumping out of the crib, and we were worried she was going to get hurt because she was a climber. So that presented this whole new situation. There was another time we had this big, beautiful wooden dresser. She pulled the dresser down on top of her, so the dresser had to leave the room. Eventually, the crib had to leave the room. The lights, which sounds really weird, but this is a big thing with autism. She would flick the light switch on and off, on and off,
Yeah.
on and off all night long.
Literally all night long. Not like, for a few minutes. Like, we'd come back up hours later, and that light would just be going on, off, on, off, on, off. I used to think, man, what do our neighbors think is happening? You've seen this light just blink on and off for hours.
So that
we had
sounds
to take the light bulbs
ridiculous.
out
We
of her
took
room.
the light bulbs out of her room. So it went from this Pinterest beautiful nursery to, and I kid you not when I say this, but what she needed was a mattress, a lot of blankets, some pillows on the floor, and everything else. A lock on the closet doors, because she would get into her closet and pull all of her toys out in the middle of the night. The light bulbs had to be removed. Now, again, I say this isn't true of every child,
Right.
but this is an extreme instance, but it models the same idea. It can't be about what we want for our kids. It has to be about, especially with sleep, what do they need? What kind of room can I create where there isn't all of these distractions or dangers, because honestly, there were dangers in her room, like dangerous things.
She made
that
everything dangerous.
Yeah, and so it was really hard for me. And during that time, I remember we were getting certified to do foster care. And so at one point, the social worker came and they do a home study and they walk through your home. And I'm like, okay, here's the bedroom we're going to put our foster kids in. And it was all pretty and decorated and Pinterest worthy. And she's like, well, what's that room over there? I'm like, that's nothing. You don't want to go in that room. She's like, well, I need to look at every room and just see what's going on here. And I'm like, I remember being so embarrassed. She was wonderful. And I think she even had a niece or nephew on the spectrum. So I open up the door and, it's like a blanket, a pillow, and a mattress on the ground. I'm like, this is like terrible. I'm feeling like the worst parent. But she said, no, I completely understand, and you have to let go of some of those expectations, even like we talked about last week, and really realize, what does my child need? Another example of this is like, you might as a parent think, well, if I hear any noise or my child cries, like, I want as a mom to go check on them. But is that what your child needs? No, unless, they're crying and in pain. Not necessarily. Like, you're literally interrupting them almost falling asleep, or you're teaching them, like, to come to the door every second. Like, we're not helping them, teaching them to self-soothe, where they can learn to fall asleep on their own, whether they're a baby or a toddler or, even a little bit older. Like, sometimes what we want isn't what our kids need.
And we know, like, we know how difficult this can be. I really think Mara is probably one of the worst cases there could be in this situation. She did everything that you wouldn't even expect a child to do. The reason that we had a mattress on the floor is because even when we tried to move to a bed, she turned from climbing on her bed to climbing on her windowsill to jumping on the floor. So literally it was this like pounding noise every 3 to 4 seconds. And part of it was simply because we were in a bedroom next door to her and we could never sleep.
Yeah.
Literally never sleep. There was a period of time once where it was about 12 to 14 weeks long, where she, no joke, woke up every single night about 2 a.m. and screamed for 3 to 4 hours. And I'm not talking like I'm talking a blood curdling scream. Like, I would do it on the microphone, but you would all be freaked out. A blood curdling, like someone's murdering her. I mean, no joke. The first couple times you rush in, you're all like, what's happening in here? And she's just fine. She's just in a room screaming hysterically. And, we would, as Christians, we would pray for her. We would try to get her to go back to sleep. We would try to, tuck her into her sheets. She'd be out in a second. I remember actually after many weeks with that particular situation, this is where we realized how desperate sleep a situation really could get, is I was sitting outside her door. I remember I'm sitting on the floor, it's hardwood floors in my hallway. It's about 3 a.m. and she's screaming this blood-curdling scream, and I'm crying. I'm going to cry out thinking about it. I'm crying because it sounds like my daughter could be being murdered in the room next to me. I know she's not. I know, in fact, she's fine. And to this day, I don't know why she did it. She was doing this thing, and it was probably this release thing because, honestly, she stimmed herself a lot. It means she would try to do things that would cause the stimulation, and she enjoyed it, so she repeated. Well, she's in this other room stimming, screaming, and I'm here not having slept well in nearly months at this point. And I think to myself, I'm losing my mind. I literally thought, I'm losing my mind. Like, I felt insane on the inside of my mind. And we realized, like, this has to end somehow. And there's a whole story to even that particular, but we realized we have to do whatever it takes. So even if it means, at night, took the light bulbs out at night, in the morning, put the light bulbs back in, put the lock on the door, because if not, she's downstairs and it's all these issues, So we did whatever we had to do, because really we had to teach her to sleep, and we had to realize we need to sleep too.
Yeah, and it starts from such a young age, whether you have special needs or not, because as a baby, and this is something that, a lot of parents struggle with big time, is babies, little infants, newborns, they wake up to eat in the middle of the night. So you already start to be sleep deprived when you have any baby, regardless of, if they're completely healthy, typical baby. And one of the things, this is just a little tip / change your life. The book Baby Wise, okay? If you have a baby that's like, under the age of 1 and you're struggling with sleep, because that, it's a real thing. You got to get up at night. There's night feedings. Baby Wise was the best book that I ever read. And all of my kids as babies slept amazing because of that book. And it really talks about how, I won't get into the book, but the idea that if you nurse your baby or feed your baby to get them to fall asleep, or anytime you cry, if you just feed them, that actually creates this terrible habit. And not that you don't feed them when they're hungry, but that learning, basically a sleep pattern, that babies, you can create this sleep pattern that helps them to sleep through the night. It's the best book ever. And the other thing with babies, that as far as sleeping, super practical, swaddle. Swaddle your baby, because when they're little, their nervous system isn't fully developed, and so they have these little I don't know, spastic movements even when they're asleep. So what happens is you try to lay them down in a crib or a bassinet or even a swing, wherever you're trying to get them to fall asleep, they wake themselves up. And so they're used to being in really tight confined spaces in the womb. So if you swaddle your baby, even into 3-4 months old, I mean, we bought like the big sleep sacks, and they had like little Velcro so you could make them all nice and tight. My kids slept so good. And it wasn't just one of them. I've had 5. And they all have different, struggles, special needs. They all slept so good as babies. So those are just little tips. So our second point I want to focus on. Now this might get us a lot of hate mail. I don't know. I don't care. Co-sleeping is a bad idea for so many reasons. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about just some of the case studies.
Yeah, I mean,
or the
I would
research.
say co-sleeping doesn't promote any kind of healthy rest. It does. I understand the theory and the thinking behind promoting this connecting with your child. My argument with that is you've got 16 hours of the rest of the day to do that. You don't need to bring them into your bed to do that as well. There's all sorts of practical reasons behind it. I mean, actually, tons of new studies show that co-sleeping causes a lot of chronic sleeping disorders in children later. So if you think, well, I'm just going to co-sleep for a while, maybe a year or two, you've already developed this really difficult thing for them to undo to try to get them to sleep on their own. And there's this dependency idea that when we literally sleeping on your own is probably the first way a person has to learn to be dependent as a child, right? Like they can't even eat on their own yet. They can't hardly get dressed on their own. They don't know how to clean themselves on their own. It's the first thing you should try to get them to learn to do on their own. And I actually think it's this milestone, and I've read lots of stuff about that. This milestone of learning to sleep on their own will actually help them just be dependent human beings when they need to be. And so co-sleeping does not promote really good, healthy rest. And then there's just all the statistics of people who do co-sleeping talk about basically, I mean, listen, if you're a spouse with someone or you're sleeping with another person in bed, you know that there's now rules to sleeping in that bed. My wife's going to pull these covers, and in the morning I'm going to wake up half cold, and I'm going to have to slightly nudge them back. It's just something I've learned, this is what it's like to sleep with my wife next to me. Add more human beings to that. I don't even know how you get anything.
Dogs.
You get no sleep done. I mean, kids are they're typically restless sleepers.
Yes,
they move more.
a lot.
So you're going to have knees in your face and hands in your face. And it's all cute and stuff in a movie, but it's not cute every single night when you're not getting any sleep. It actually creates this rest, you don't actually get the rest you need as a person, and it creates this problem within really the world around you as a person. Like I talked earlier, I need rest. If I had my kids sleeping in my bed every night, I'd probably be a worse parent than if they weren't sleeping in my bed, right? It's this idea of getting the sleep you need so that you can be the person you're supposed to be for the world around you. So there's lots of things. We're not for co-sleeping. We think that it's kind of, first off, it's not great for marriages either. We think that...
I don't understand how that works, but we won't go into that.
We won't go into that.
But boundary-wise, too, so even you're talking about a marriage, but if you want to go back, if you haven't already listened to our last episode was about unmet expectations, and we talked about external and internal, and we talked some about boundaries. But the one thing that I said last week was that boundaries define who we are. So the very simple definition of this is my room. This is your room. That sounds like elementary, duh. This is my bed. This is your bed. It's a huge deal. And we might not think, well, they can be fuzzy for a while, but like Greg was saying, it creates a habit, and then the blurriness of our boundaries then allows things to become, whether it's codependency or whatever. And I get it as a mom, and I totally struggle with this, especially with our first few kids, because that moment when, a lot of times when you have a baby and they have feedings at night and they start sleeping a little bit more and you want to move them to their nursery or their room, that's hard. For all of my kids, that was a struggle for me. So I understand that. And it was the only reason my kids are as good sleepers as they are is because he was very much like, no, this is healthy. This is right. And I had to kind of, like you let myself cringe a little bit, like, and I don't, want them in the other room.
We had a pretty good boundary. I mean, just being honest, I never really went to my parents' bedroom unless it was like a really terrible nightmare that I had. And I had nightmares as a kid.
Right.
And, like it was like not rare. I didn't spend time in there. It was just like, this is their space. This is their room. And I even would promote the idea that as a parent, if you want to be a healthy minded parent, you should be able to have some space. We all laugh at the memes that you see on Facebook of like a mom in the bathroom on her phone, like holding the door shut to get a little bit of space. I mean, that's funny, but the truth is you should have a little bit of sanctuary space in your home. And I would just maybe put out the idea, it could be your bedroom.
Right.
Our kids they'll come in our bedroom like,
Oh,
we're
they
not
try.
Nazis.
Jump on my bed.
We're not militaristic about it. But when they're in there, I go, what are you guys doing in here? And I literally make it sound like you shouldn't be here. And they'll be like, oh, I was just grabbing this. Okay, well, now you can go out. We don't play in our bedroom. We don't play in mom and dad's room. Like we promote this idea, not that like you can't ever enter here, because they absolutely do.
Every morning.
But it's not another playroom. It's not another place for you to hang out. We don't have you sleep in here. And so, I kind of usher them out. And it's created this healthy boundary where they know where they sleep, they know where we sleep, and it's just been good for us.
Yeah. And so the third tip that I just want to encourage you guys with is trust that your kids can learn this skill. It's a skill. There is not some kids, unless there's some like medical condition I don't know about, but even with special needs, I don't care what your situation is, it's a skill that can be learned. And you need to trust your kids to believe in them enough that they can. I don't care what their age is. I don't care how long maybe they've slept, co-slept, or how many times they wake up in the night. They can learn this, but they need you to help them learn this. And that's where we have to, kind of put our foot down.
Listen, humans were designed for sleep. No one can resist it long enough. And I know there are a few medical situations that occur where someone can't get sleep, right? That does happen. But generally, as a human, you literally can't resist sleep long enough. There's a point where your body will just say, too bad, I'm falling asleep, right? Jessica's an incredible runner, and so we've watched every running movie that there probably exists. I happen to know tons about running, not because I do run. In fact, I hate it. But I know a lot because I hear her and we read stuff, and there's this guy out there named Dean Karnazes, and he was trying to beat the longest run, continuous run for a person. He ran 84 hours. 84 hours. This guy, and they actually had to take him off the road because he was wavering too much, and he was running around the track near the end until he literally face planted asleep. He face planted because his body just said, enough. It doesn't matter that you want to keep going. You will now go to sleep. And so there is a place, and that's where it's like really hard for parents, because you love your kids. You don't want to hear them cry. You don't want to go through the difficulty part. But sometimes it's like you just have to outweight them to get them to not face plant on pavement, but to face plant into their bed and finally learn to sleep on their own.
I think that honestly, there's usually in most marriages, if you're in a family dynamic like that, there's a stronger spouse and a weaker one. I'm definitely the weaker one. So like what I had to do for my son Jacob was, I think I was going to visit my mom in New Jersey anyway, and so my husband used that opportune time of me being gone for 3 nights or 4 days or whatever it was to try to get my son to sleep on his own, because he would cry and I would go in there and try to rock him to sleep. And, my husband was like, listen, you're going to be gone for 4 days, so I'm going to let him cry it out. And I'm like, oh, no. But because I wasn't there to be tormented by he was fine, but the cries of my son, he was able to get him to sleep through the night on his own, something that I was not really capable of doing. So I just encourage you, even if it's that extreme, even if you got to go for a couple days, spend the night, at your parents, or, you got a trip coming up, and you kind of be intentional and say, okay, we're going to work on our child sleeping through the night.
And I'm a heavy sleeper, right? So for me, noise almost never wakes me up, honestly, which is a little bit probably maddening for her because
Yes.
I never hear what's
The
happening.
floor creaks, and I'm like,
Yeah, so I sleep heavy. So even when she left for that situation, Jacob was a difficult one. But again, he wasn't even that old. He was probably only a year and a half old. And I was just like, no, he can be sleeping now on his own. And he had been having a pacifier, and I was like, I'm going to break him of his pacifier, and he's going to sleep through the night. And I was vigilant about it. And the first night, I remember thinking, oh my gosh. I started to think, he's never going to go to sleep. He cried and cried and cried to the point where I went out in my garage and I found my earplugs that I work with when I'm working. And I put earplugs in because I knew it was hard to hear him crying that much. But honestly, I don't remember when he fell asleep. And then the next night, it was like a lot shorter. And then by the third night, no joke, he cried for about 5 minutes. And then every night after that, he was fine.
right. So it's possible. Believe that your kids can learn
Yes.
this skill. So yeah, we want to talk about the dose of humor, and this is just basically a ridiculous story. It was not funny at the time, but
All our stories weren't funny at the time, but they're funny to us now.
So this is, our kids were probably, Jeremiah was 5, and Mara was maybe 4, and we were fast asleep, all of us, or so I thought, all of us, and about 4 a.m. I had this pounding knock on my door, and I'm thinking something is terribly wrong. It wakes me up. I run down the stairs, like in my pajamas, and it's my next door neighbor. And now she was an elderly woman. She didn't even come out of her house very often. So I'm thinking, is her house on fire? Is she okay? Does she need me to call 911? And so she's pounding on the door. So I it's still dark outside. I fling the door open. I'm like, is everything okay? And I look over and she's got my daughter Mara by the arm. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And Mara's kind of pitching a fit and mad and yelling. And I said, what's going on? I'm so sorry. And I'm half, confused because it's 4 a.m. and my brain isn't even working. I was fast asleep a minute ago. And she said, I thought someone was breaking into my house. And I'm like, what? And she said, your daughter climbed on the deck so she had a pool and a deck. And my daughter had climbed on the deck. She had gotten out, woke up in the middle of the night. This is before we had, our super locked down house, which now you understand why we have it. Went outside, got on the deck. This was in winter, wasn't it? It was cold out. It was snow, I don't remember. Went on the deck of her pool, which had a patio sliding door. And I don't know, thank God obviously she couldn't have swam in the pool. It was winter. Decides, for God knows why, to open the patio door, which was unlocked, goes into my neighbor's house. She has this little bunny that she carries around all the time, like this bean-bagged kind of bunny, and is probably swirling it around, having a happy time. And she throws it, and it lands into a recycling bin. Now, this is inside my neighbor's house. So a clatter of all these cans and recyclables, and this poor elderly woman wakes up, who's sleeping upstairs, and is like, oh my gosh, there is a burglar in my house. Someone is breaking into my house right now. And she lives alone. So she doesn't have a husband to go down there with a shotgun or something. Thank God, so she's petrified. So she's holding the phone in her hand thinking, do I call the police? What do I do right now? And thank God she didn't. She gets brave enough to kind of tiptoe down the stairs and peer and try to see okay, who is this and what are they stealing? And she sees, my daughter probably going through her cupboards at that point looking for food. I have no idea what she was doing. So that's why she ended up at my door at 4 a.m. So, when you talk
Less
about...
than happy.
Yes. She's a wonderful lady, but she was not happy that night.
She was not happy.
And so, sleep is so important, and knowing your kids are safe are so important. And that goes back to, it's not about what you want, it's about what they need. So that's where we had to it was I feel horrible locking her door. We had these little eye hooks, on the outside of my daughter's bedroom door. And I thought, this is just terrible. This is what people in horror movies do. They lock their kids in their bedroom. But it couldn't be any more about how things were perceived or what somebody thought about me. It had to be, I needed to know my daughter was safe. As a mom, you can't lay in bed at night and worry what was that noise? Is she got outside again? I will never be able to sleep, and she can't sleep either because she's wandering around the house. And so it really, at the end of the day, no matter what that looks like, you have to say, what do they need to have a restful sleep? What do I need to have a restful sleep? And being willing to implement whatever those changes are.
Yeah, and we've come a long way. Some of these stories are from the way in the past. For us, Mara's nearly 13 years old, and Jacob's 8 years old, and they kind of still have their own little sleep rhythms,
They're good.
but that's also part of it. Like as they got older, we had to give a little bit of leeway. Jacob, we know we're gonna put him to bed at about 8:30, and that kid's gonna go up, and we're gonna turn the light off. Now, actually, in his room right now, we do have
No
to take
light
the light
bulbs.
bulbs out because he will stay up all night. He'll stay up at night to read.
Yep.
And what he does now is he goes into his brother's bed because him and his brother Isaac share a room because we have too many kids and not enough bedrooms. And he goes over with his book by this tiny little nightlight, and he just stands there and reads. And we let him,
He would read all night.
And we let him for a while, and then we go in there, and he's gotten to, I let him do that, and then I take his book away from him,
Right.
But it was a little bit of a rhythm to do that. Mara, she's pretty much like a teenager now. In
sleeps
fact,
in.
she likes to sleep in and hates to be woken up. So and actually, I'm like, we let her do it when we have, during school, obviously she has her, but otherwise, I'm like, let the girl sleep, make sure she stays happy. So, we're going to end now just kind of on a quick discussion around just our dose of hope for your life. And for rest in your life. Scripture teaches us that rest is imperative. I said as humans, we're all built this way. We're designed this way. You were designed for
Right.
sleep. Don't try to think it's like a less than thing. In fact, I would say embrace it and do whatever you need to do for yourself as a parent and as a human to find rhythms of rest in your life. We realize this especially as parents, but also as leaders in the church. My job is quite rigorous in a lot of ways, and we have a fairly large church. We plant a lot of churches. We're in the middle of planting a church right now. In fact, in January 9th, we're launching a new church that's just about 45 minutes away from us. We've been planning it. We've been doing it. We're doing all this work on the building. And this week is always a rest week for our staff. We literally take 3 weeks off a year that are called rest weeks. And it's because we believed in the idea of rest and Sabbath in the Bible so much that I said, we're going to build in time when we have to rest. I don't let our staff work. I literally say, no work during this week. And so after Christmas, we take a week off. And I have this like looming deadline of a launch service.
Yeah, he has a lot of things he could be
and
doing.
a lot of
should
stuff
be.
that needs to be done.
Yes, a lot.
But I literally am like, I'm not going to fill my life with that simply because I believe this idea that, if I just keep working, I'm going to get more done. In fact, Sabbath built in the Bible was to teach us the seventh day of the week idea was not just simply like, oh, take a break or, and it is to honor God. But I think it was this idea of to trust God for an idea of rest that when we actually take rests in our life, we're more productive the rest of the time. And so I have to choose to not believe the lie that by just working without ever stopping, that I could actually be more productive than if I work and have rhythms of rest in my life. And one of those main rhythms is every single night sleeping. And for me, I had to learn even more recently as, kind of maybe the roles of my life as a leader have kind of heightened. I've had more pressure, more burdens, more things on me, and I had to realize I have to buckle down, which means that on a normal basis, now this week's a little bit different because my kids are off, we stay up a little later. I'm trying to go to bed by 10:30. In fact, honestly, I'm nearly dead to the world by that time. I try to get up at a certain time so that I can be prepared for the day, that I get I need this time. And I just want to give you a couple little hints. Less Netflix and less scrolling. Whatever it is, I know, seriously, don't. Sometimes we get to the end of the day with kids and we feel like it's our only time to.
I'm bad with that.
I mean, honestly,
it's my only free time. Whether it's I have something I want to get done, or it's I just want to be mindless and scroll, or watch a show, or sit in my bed and read a book because I can. And so
Right.
there's something there's that incentive there. You're like, no one's bothering me.
Right.
No one's calling mommy. And I want to enjoy that time, which you can to a degree, but you find yourself staying up later and later.
But actually, I'll just say, if you want to Google this and read some articles about this, something actually takes place in our brain as we scroll through our phones. It literally triggers something. The way that scrolling operates, and I'll just be honest, I'm pretty sure social media knows this and purposely does this to us. It actually activates the part of your brain that causes you not to be able to sleep well. So if you scroll for a while in bed and then go to bed, you actually don't sleep as well as if you just we're able to like shut that out first. Your brain starts to shut down, and then you go to bed, and if you start scrolling, it's like you've awakened it back up again. And so I would just recommend find some ways to make sure you get this rhythm of rest in your life.
Right.
And I want to leave you with this verse, Matthew 11:28. At the end of the day, all sorts of circumstances can cause us to be weary, can cause us to not feel restful, and we can do all the practical things we can to find rest. But I will always point you to Jesus, because at the end of the day, this is where we get our sustenance from. It's where we get everything from, is from him. In Matthew 11:28, these are Jesus' words. He says this, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Listen, if you're a parent, you are weary, and you probably have some heavy burdens, especially if you have children with autism.
Yes.
Take my yoke upon you, Jesus says. He says, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Now, doesn't that sound good? Because sometimes, honestly, the rest that we need in our life is beyond just sleeping.
Physical.
There's something within our mental state and within our body that just needs to feel okay, like things are going to be good, and you have this rest within your soul. I'm telling you, that rest, it's only going to come from God. It's only going to come from Jesus. And he says, "For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." So listen, no matter what circumstances have been put on you from life, I don't think they're always from Jesus, but even if those are the circumstances you find yourself in, a parent of children with special needs, a parent with kids with autism, just a parent of children at all, whatever situation you find yourself, Jesus is saying that burden can be light. Now let me teach you. And so listen, let him teach you today what it's like to have healthy rest.
Amen. So we just want to leave you with this prayer. May God give you the wisdom to be the best parent that you can be. May he give you the grace to love your kids when they fall and when they fail. And may he give you the faith to trust an unknown future to a known God. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave a review.